The night it began was not remarkable. The streets were empty, the sky was dimly clouded, and in the small town of Elmbrook, most windows had already gone dark. Only a few lamps glowed on porches, and a faint buzz of crickets carried through the late summer air. Lydia Crane, 33, leaned against her kitchen counter with a cup of cooling chamomile tea in her hands. The silence of her house was something she had grown used to after her divorce 2 years ago, but lately, the stillness felt heavier. That night, she wandered into her living room where a large photograph hung above the fireplace. It was an old family portrait taken in 1996. She remembered the day clearly. Her parents smiling stiffly in their Sunday best, her little brother Mark fidgeting in his button-down shirt, and herself at just 8 years old, seated in front with a ribbon in her hair. The photo was always a comfort, a reminder of when things felt whole. But as she glanced at it now, something tugged at her. She froze. The picture looked different. She couldn't put her finger on it first. Just an uncanny shift, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before your mind catches up. She set her mug down and stepped closer. The faces were still there, smiling in that staged, mid-90s way. Her father's tie, her mother's floral dress, the pale backdrop of the photography studio. Nothing obvious. Yet the longer she stared, the stronger the unease became. It was Mark. In the photograph, his posture seemed straighter than before. His hands, which she remembered being awkwardly clenched at his sides, now rested neatly on his lap. And his eyes, she swore they had always been wandering, glancing downward. Now they looked straight ahead, right at her. Lydia blinked, her breath hitching. She tried to shake off the sensation, reminding herself that memories bend with time. Maybe she misremembered. Maybe she'd never paid close enough attention. But even as she rationalized, she couldn't look away from her brother's gaze, now piercing through decades and paper. She whispered into the empty room, "That's not how it was." The house answered only with silence. She forced herself to laugh, though the sound came out strained, and turned away. A trick of the mind, nothing more. She carried her mug back into the kitchen, rinsed it, and shut off the lights. But even upstairs, as she pulled the sheets over herself and tried to focus on sleep, the image burned in her mind. Her brother's stare, direct and unblinking, as if the photograph had been waiting for her to notice. The next morning, Lydia went about her routine. Coffee, checking emails, preparing lesson plans for her high school English students. But a low, crawling unease lingered at the edges of her mind. She avoided the living room entirely. It wasn't until late afternoon, when sunlight angled across her floorboards, that she dared glance at the portrait again. She wished she hadn't. Mark's smile had changed. It wasn't broad or grotesque, nothing exaggerated, just a subtle tightening of the corners of his mouth, enough to register as different from yesterday, enough to feel wrong. Her phone nearly slipped from her hand as she scrambled to pull up an old copy of the photo. She remembered scanning it years ago to post on social media. She searched through old folders, scrolling past digital clutter, until finally she found the file. She opened it, comparing it side by side with a framed print. Her breath caught in her throat. In the digital version, Mark's eyes looked downward, unfocused, and his mouth was neutral, almost a half smile, just as she'd always remembered. The framed version on her wall was not the same picture. Her skin prickled. The two versions should have been identical. They were the same photograph, yet one had shifted, altered in ways so subtle and impossible that her mind recoiled at the logic of it. She whispered again, barely audible, No, that's not possible." She snapped a picture of the framed photo with her phone and compared it to the digital file. Side by side, the difference was undeniable. She set her phone down quickly, heart pounding. For the rest of the evening, she avoided the living room altogether. She cooked dinner without turning on the overhead lights, leaving half the kitchen in shadow. She turned the TV on loud to drown out her own thoughts. Still, every so often, she felt the pull of that room, as though the photograph demanded her attention. When night fell, she locked every door twice, checked every window, then carried herself upstairs with the bone-deep tiredness of someone trying to outrun their own mind. But sleep wouldn't come. At 2:17 a.m., she woke suddenly, the silence pressing on her ears like a weight. She sat up, realizing she must have heard something, a creak, a shift, a sound she couldn't quite place. She listened, heart hammering. Nothing. Still, she swung her legs out of bed, bare feet pressing against the cold floorboards. The house felt different in the dark, its corners longer, its spaces emptier. Slowly, she made her way down the stairs, each step groaning under her weight. At the bottom, she froze. From the living room, a faint glow spilled across the hallway floor. Not a bright light, just a pale shimmer, as if the air itself shimmered faintly. Her throat tightened. With trembling hands, she flicked on the hall light. The glow vanished. Gathering her courage, she stepped into the living room. The lamp was off, the windows shut. Nothing unusual, except the photograph. Even in the dim light, she could see it had changed again. Her brother's head was tilted now, just slightly, and his smile had sharpened into something unreadable. Worse, his right hand had shifted. It was no longer folded neatly on his lap. Now it pressed against the shoulder of the little girl version of Lydia in the picture. A protective gesture, perhaps, or a restraining one. She staggered back, knocking into the coffee table. Her breath came fast and shallow. The digital copy, she thought frantically. She needed to see it again. She needed to confirm. She rushed for her phone, opened the save file, and nearly dropped it. In the digital version, her brother's posture was unchanged. The smile was neutral. The hands were as they had always been. Her gaze snapped back to the framed photo. Different. Still different. She clutched her phone to her chest, whispering like a prayer. This isn't real. This isn't real. But the photograph didn't care. It had already changed once, and now it was waiting. Lydia didn't sleep again that night. She sat curled on the couch with her knees pulled up, clutching her phone like a lifeline while staring into the dim outline of the photograph across the room. She refused to look at it directly, afraid of seeing it shift again. Every time her eyes fluttered closed, she startled awake, certain she'd missed something. By the time dawn spilled pale light through the curtains, her body felt hollow, drained of energy. She dragged herself into the kitchen, brewed coffee strong enough to sting her tongue, and tried to remind herself that the day was ordinary. School, students, papers to grade. That was reality. Yet as she passed the living room on her way out the door, she couldn't resist a glance. Her stomach dropped. The photograph had changed once more. This time, her own younger self looked wrong. The ribbon in her hair was gone, strands hanging loose against her shoulders. Her expression, once a sweet, uncertain smile, was now flat. Her 8-year-old eyes stared blankly outward, empty in a way no child's eyes should be. Lydia covered her mouth, a sound of disbelief caught in her throat. She almost tore the frame from the wall right then, but something inside her screamed not to. A primal instinct, the same that told her not to peer over the edge of a cliff or stand too close to an oncoming train. Instead, she grabbed her bag and keys, bolted out the front door, and drove to school faster than usual, the morning sun glaring in her mirrors. The day passed in a blur. She tried to focus on her students' essays, but her thoughts drifted again and again to the photograph. She'd catch herself staring at the classroom clock, wondering what it looked like now. If her brother's smile had stretched wider. If the child version of herself had shifted further. When a fellow teacher asked if she was feeling okay, Lydia forced a smile and blamed it on a migraine. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her head ached from lack of sleep, but the pain sat deeper than that, rooted in her nerves. By the final bell, dread knotted her stomach. The thought of going home made her hands tremble on the steering wheel. Yet avoiding her house entirely seemed absurd. She couldn't explain why, but she felt tethered to the photograph. Like whatever force was changing it would only grow stronger if she tried to ignore it. The moment she opened her front door, the silence inside seemed heavier than before. Dust motes floated in the shafts of afternoon light, and every creak of the floor sounded louder than it should. She set her bag down, her eyes already drawn to the living room. She froze at the threshold. Something new had appeared in the photograph. A shadow, not cast by anyone in the frame, but lingering behind them, faint and indistinct. It stretched upward, shapeless yet unmistakably human in outline, as though someone stood behind the family that day, but had never been captured until now. Her chest constricted. The scanned copy on her phone still showed nothing unusual, no shadow, no blank-eyed child, no unnatural smile. But the framed photo on her wall had taken on a life of its own. Lydia pressed a hand against her forehead, whispering to herself, "I'm losing it. I'm actually losing it." Yet, deep down, she knew she wasn't. She did something then she hadn't dared yet. She lifted the frame carefully from the wall. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it. She studied the edges, the backing, searching for signs of tampering. Maybe a replacement photo slipped behind glass. But when she peeled back the backing, there was only one photograph. No hidden layers. No tricks. She pressed her palm flat against the glossy surface. Cold. Ordinary. But when her fingertips brushed against the image of Mark's face, she swore the paper rippled faintly, like disturbed water. She snatched her hand back, heart thundering. She shoved the frame down against the couch cushions, burying the image face down. For the first time in days, she felt a thin thread of relief. That night, she allowed herself a few hours of uneasy rest. But the house had other plans. At exactly 3:08 a.m., a thud echoed from the living room. She jolted upright, chest tight, listening hard. Another thud followed, heavier this time, like something falling to the floor. She crept down the stairs, her bare feet hesitant against the wood. The photograph lay on the floor. Face up, she froze at the sight. She had left it face down, buried beneath the weight of pillows. Yet there it was, glass catching the moonlight from the window, reflecting her own wide-eyed face back at her. Her knees felt weak. Still, she forced herself closer, every step deliberate. When she looked down at it, her stomach turned cold. The shadow in the background was clearer now. No longer a vague smear, but the faint outline of a man. His head was tilted downward, as though watching the family in the photo. Watching her, Lydia staggered backward, covering her mouth with both hands. She didn't pick it up again. She left the photograph lying there, face up, and retreated upstairs, shutting herself in her bedroom with the lock turned tight. She sat on the edge of her bed until morning came, trembling with the knowledge that the picture would not stop changing just because she turned her back. By daylight, her fear turned to desperation. She grabbed the photograph, stuffed it into a cardboard box, and carried it out to the garage. The box sat there among old holiday decorations and tools, sealed away. She told herself it was done. But that night, as she tried to fall asleep, a sound reached her ears, a soft, deliberate tapping. She sat up, straining to hear. The noise came from downstairs. Top, top, top. Her throat tightened. She slipped quietly out of bed, crept to the top of the stairs, and peered down. The garage door stood closed, but the sound echoed faintly behind it. Slow, patient taps like fingernails against cardboard. She clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. The photograph was not content to be hidden. The tapping didn't stop. It grew irregular, sometimes rapid, sometimes painfully slow, but it never ceased. Lydia sat at the top of the stairs, frozen in the dark, counting each sound until the numbers blurred together. She wanted to believe it was something else, the settling of the house, a branch scratching against the siding, a rodent in the garage, but the rhythm was too precise, too deliberate. By dawn, the tapping faded, but the silence left in its place felt worse. She ventured downstairs cautiously, every step heavy with dread. The garage smelled faintly of dust and motor oil when she eased the door open. The box was where she had left it, sealed, untouched. Her relief lasted only a moment. The cardboard was scarred with faint, parallel lines, as though something inside had clawed at it from within. Her stomach churned. She staggered back and slammed the garage door shut, locking it as though that flimsy barrier could protect her. That day, she didn't go to school. She called in sick her voice trembling as she left a message on the principal's voicemail. She couldn't face her students. Not when she hadn't slept. Not when every sound in her house made her jump. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, searching for answers. She typed variations of the same question into the search bar again and again. Photograph changes on its own, haunted pictures real, family portraits shifting over time. What she found was a swamp of paranormal forums and clickbait articles, most of it ridiculous. Photos where ghosts had supposedly appeared, grainy videos of frames sliding off walls. Nothing that explained what she was experiencing. Nothing that felt close to the truth. But buried among the noise, she stumbled upon a thread posted 6 years ago. The title read, "They Move When You're Not Looking." She clicked. The post was written by someone anonymous, their words shaky and rambling. They described a childhood photograph that had changed subtly over the years. At first, it was small things, the tilt of a head, the direction of a gaze. Then larger, one figure disappearing, another appearing in the background. The writer claimed the photo carried a presence, something that fed on attention, that wanted to be seen. The thread ended abruptly after only 3 posts. The user never returned. Lydia sat back from her laptop, her skin clammy. She whispered into the empty kitchen, "It can't be the same. It can't." But it was. The thought that there were others, that this wasn't isolated, chilled her more than anything else. If it had happened before, it could happen again. And maybe, just maybe, the others hadn't survived. That night, Lydia tried something different. She set her phone up on the counter, angled toward the living room, and pressed record. If the photograph wanted to move, she would catch it in the act. She would have proof. She left the house then, unable to stay inside with it. She drove aimlessly, circling quiet streets, parking outside closed shops, staring blankly at neon signs. Hours passed before she gathered the courage to return. Her phone battery had nearly died by the time she unlocked her front door. She hurried to the kitchen, heart racing, and stopped the recording. The video had captured 6 hours of stillness. She scrubbed through it quickly, eyes straining. Nothing moved, until the very end. At 5 hours, 42 minutes, and 16 seconds, the frame slipped sideways, falling against the couch cushions. She watched it again and again, each time feeling the air leave her lungs. It hadn't simply fallen. The frame had lifted before it toppled, as though pushed by an unseen hand. Her chest tightened. Proof. She had proof. Yet the validation only made her feel worse. That night, she slept with the lights on. In the days that followed, the changes became bolder. On Wednesday, the shadow in the background was no longer faint. It had a face. Indistinct, blurred at the edges, but unmistakably watching. Its eyes were pale, its mouth slightly open, as though whispering something inaudible. On Thursday, her younger self in the photo had shifted again. The blank stare remained, but her small hand now gripped her brother's wrist tightly, knuckles white. The gesture looked desperate, pleading. By Friday, her brother's expression had changed entirely. His smile was gone. In its place was a look of strain, as though he were holding something back. His eyes no longer met hers across the years, but flicked sideways toward the shadow behind them. Lydia's sanity frayed with each alteration. She stopped going to work altogether. Her phone buzzed with calls she ignored. Her fridge grew emptier by the day, but she barely noticed. Her world had shrunk to the walls of her home, to the photograph that now consumed her life. One evening, desperate for clarity, she called her mother. "Mom," she said, try to keep her voice steady. "Do you remember that family portrait? The one from the 90s? Her mother chuckled lightly. "Of course I do. You hated that ribbon in your hair." "Yes," Lydia said quickly. "That's the one. Do you remember how Mark was posing? His hands, his smile." There was a pause on the line. Then her mother sighed. "Honey, why are you asking? That picture, we don't have it anymore." Lydia's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean? I have it here on my wall." "No, you don't," her mother said firmly. "That photograph was lost years ago. In the house fire. Don't you remember?" Lydia's vision swam. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. It's right here. I'm looking at it." Her mother's voice softened with concern. "Lydia, maybe you should come stay with me for a while. You sound tired." But Lydia couldn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the living room, on the photograph that should not exist, that could not exist, and yet was still here. When she finally hung up, her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She staggered toward the frame, heart pounding with the sick knowledge that her mother was right. The photo had burned years ago, and yet it was here, alive, changing, waiting. That night, when the tapping returned, Lydia didn't flinch. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the garage door, and whispered into the silence, "What do you want from me?" No answer came, only the steady, patient sound of fingernails against cardboard. The tapping grew louder each night. What began as faint scratches now carried through the floorboards, pulsing into Lydia's bones. She stopped sleeping entirely. Her days blurred, her mind thick with exhaustion, yet she couldn't leave. Every time she packed a bag, every time she reached for her keys, something inside her pulled her back. The photograph wouldn't let her go. By the fifth night, she gave in. She carried the box from the garage into the living room, placed it on the rug, and knelt before it. Her hands shook as she peeled back the tape and folded open the flaps. The frame lay inside, untouched. For a long moment, she stared at the back of it, afraid to turn it over. When she finally did, her stomach lurched. The photograph had changed again. Her younger self was gone. The space where she had once sat was empty, a pale outline, the only trace left behind. Mark sat alone in the front row now, his face drawn and tight, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. Behind him, the shadow loomed clearer, its mouth stretched into a cavernous shape, whispering something Lydia could almost hear if she leaned close enough. She staggered back, ball rising in her throat. Her childhood self had vanished. Erased. The phone slipped from her hand as she whispered, "Where did she go?" The photograph didn't answer. That evening, Lydia tore through her attic, searching for proof. Old albums, dusty boxes, stacks of Polaroids. She flipped through page after page, her hands smudged with grime, her heart thundering with each turn. But when she reached the page where the family portrait should have been, there was nothing, just a blank slot, an empty sleeve where the photo had once been kept. Her breath came shallow. The photograph on her wall was the only one left. A thought gnawed at her. What if the image had never been just a photograph? What if it had always been something else, something that had slipped into her family's life that day in the studio and taken root? Her memory tugged at her. That day, she could still recall the photographer's studio, the buzzing overhead lights, the stale smell of carpet, the way her brother kept fidgeting. She remembered the click of the camera, her father's sigh, her mother's strained smile. But there was something else, a fragment of memory she hadn't thought of in years. A man, standing in the corner of the studio, watching. Not the photographer, someone else. Pale, silent, eyes fixed on them. She remembered glancing at him nervously, only for her mother to squeeze her shoulder and whisper, "Don't look at him." Had that really happened? Or was her mind fabricating details, twisting memory into nightmare? She pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe, but the thought wouldn't leave her. The man in her memory felt too real, too sharp. The next day, desperate, Lydia drove to the old photography studio. It was long abandoned, its windows boarded, the sign faded to a ghost of its letters. She stood in the empty parking lot, staring at the locked doors, a sick heaviness in her chest. Through the cracks in the boards, she thought she saw movement. A pale flicker, gone as soon as it appeared. She stumbled back, fumbling for her keys, her heart racing. When she returned home, the photograph waited for her. She didn't remember bringing it out of the box. Yet there it was, hanging once again above the fireplace. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the couch, staring at it in horror. This time, her younger self had returned, but she wasn't seated anymore. She stood behind her brother's chair, her small hand gripping his shoulder, her eyes wide and pleading. Her mouth was open in a silent cry, and behind them both, the shadow leaned closer. Its hand hovered inches from the children's heads, as if ready to close around them. Lydia pressed her palms against her eyes, shaking. "Stop!" she whispered. Please, just stop. But when she lowered her hands, the photograph had changed again. Now her younger self wasn't looking out of the photo at all. She was looking directly at Lydia. Her tiny hand pressed against the glass, fingers splayed wide, as though trying to break through. Lydia stumbled backward, her shoulder slamming into the wall. She wanted to smash the frame, to burn it, to destroy it, but a deeper instinct told her that doing so would not end it. It would only make it worse. That night, she dreamed of the man from the studio. He stood at the edge of her bed, his face obscured, his body little more than a silhouette. Yet his voice was clear, low and cold. You were never meant to leave. She woke screaming, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might stop. Downstairs, she heard it. The photograph had fallen again. She crept to the living room, every nerve screaming to turn back, but she couldn't. The frame lay face up on the rug, and when she saw it, her breath froze in her chest. The family was gone. The photograph now showed only the studio backdrop, pale, faded, empty. The chairs sat unoccupied. No parents, no brother, no child, just the faint outline of the shadow, clearer than ever before, filling the space where they had once been. And in the corner of the frame, almost hidden, was something new, a reflection, her own, not the 8-year-old child, not the 33-year-old woman standing in her living room, but something in between, her face twisted in fear, her eyes wide, trapped behind the glass. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "That's not me. That's not me." But the longer she stared, the more certain she became. It was her, and she was inside. The reflection in the photograph would not leave her mind. Even when Lydia stumbled away from the living room, clutching her arms tight against her body, she could still see it. Her own face, pale and frightened, staring out from behind the glass like a prisoner. She tried to avoid it. She shut the door to the living room, stuffed towels beneath the crack, even turned the TV up loud in her bedroom. But the image burned inside her skull, pulsing with every heartbeat. At times she thought she heard her own voice calling faintly, muffled from downstairs. "Let me out." By morning, she couldn't deny it anymore. The photograph wanted her. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze. Lydia didn't eat. She barely drank. She paced her house endlessly, tried to resist the pull, but always ending up near the closed living room door, her hand hovering over the knob. Once she swore she saw shadows move beneath the crack, long fingers stretching across the rug. On Sunday evening, exhaustion overcame fear. She opened the door. The photograph hung in its usual place, calm and still, as though nothing had happened. But the reflection was still there, fainter now, almost hidden in the backdrop, but unmistakable. Her face, her eyes, watching. "Why me?" Lydia whispered, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this to me?" The silence pressed against her. Yet deep inside, she knew the answer. This wasn't random. It had always been tied to her family, to that day in the studio, to the pale man in the corner no one was supposed to notice. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. She fumbled it into her hand. It was a voicemail from her mother, her voice shaky. "Lydia, I don't know why I didn't tell you this before. I thought I imagined it. But when we had that photograph taken, something wasn't right." The photographer seemed distracted. And I remember, afterward, when we picked up the prints, there was one extra photo in the envelope. Not of us, just the chairs. Empty chairs. I threw it away. But I still dream about it sometimes. "Please, honey, don't look at that picture anymore. Just get rid of it." Lydia's fingers trembled around the phone. An extra photograph. The chairs. Empty. Just like the version on her wall now. Her knees weakened, and she sank onto the couch, staring at the frame. A thought formed in her mind, heavy and undeniable. Maybe she hadn't found the photograph again by accident. Maybe it had found her. That night, the tapping returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from the garage. It was closer, louder. She lay in bed, paralyzed, as the sound echoed from the hallway. Top, 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 like fingernails on glass. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Slowly, against every instinct, she turned her head toward the doorway. The photograph was leaning against the wall outside her bedroom. She screamed, stumbling backward, knocking over a nightstand. The frame sat innocently, yet its presence filled the room like a weight. The reflection inside was clearer now, her face pressed against the glass, her mouth moving in silent terror. With shaking hands, Lydia grabbed the frame and hurled it across the room. It struck the wall with a sharp crack and fell to the floor, glass splintering into shards. Her chest heaved. Her hands bled from tiny cuts. But when she dared to look again, her relief curdled into horror. The photograph was unharmed. No cracks, no broken glass. It lay flat against the floor, the surface smooth and perfect. And inside, her reflection smiled. Not the frightened, trapped expression she had seen before, but a smile. Wide, patient, waiting. Lydia fell to her knees, sobbing. She couldn't fight it. Not anymore. That night, her dreams bled into waking life. She stood once again in the photographer's studio, the smell of old carpet filling her nose. The lights buzzed overhead, hot against her skin. Her family sat in their chairs, stiff and nervous, while the man in the corner watched. He was clearer now, his skin pale as paper, his eyes dark and hollow. His mouth curved into the same patient smile she had seen in her reflection. "Smile for me," he whispered, though his lips barely moved. The camera clicked, a flash of white, and suddenly her family was gone. The chairs sat empty. Only she remained, frozen in place, unable to move. When she woke, her cheeks were wet with tears. But worse, she was in her bed. She was standing in the living room, in front of the photograph. Her own reflection pressed against the glass, smiling. And behind it, the shadow had grown so large it nearly filled the frame, its hand stretched outward, fingers curling as if inviting her in. Her voice cracked in the silence. "I don't want to go." But the reflection smiled wider. And this time, she felt it. A cold pressure against her back. A pull, gentle but insistent, drawing her closer to the frame. She staggered away, clutching at the walls, shaking her head. "No, no, you can't have me." Yet every step she took, the photograph seemed nearer, as though the walls themselves bent to keep her within reach. Her reflection's mouth moved, though no sound came. And Lydia understood. It's not asking. The rest of that day passed in fragments. She found herself sitting on the floor, staring at the photograph for hours without realizing. She lost track of time, her body numb, her mind fogged. Sometimes she thought she saw her family inside again, only to blink and find the frame empty. By evening, she barely recognized herself. Her skin pale, her eyes sunken, her thoughts circling endlessly around the photograph. The outside world felt unreal, like a place she had visited long ago but could no longer return to. When night fell, she whispered to the frame, "What happens if I give in?" And for the first time, she thought she saw the shadow move. It leaned closer. Its hollow eyes met hers, and it smiled. The smile lingered long after the shadow faded. Lydia sat motionless on the floor, staring at the photograph until her eyes burned. She couldn't look away anymore. She didn't want to. Every hour bled into the next. Sometimes she heard her phone buzzing in the distance. Sometimes she thought she heard knocks at the door. But those sounds belonged to another world, a life slipping further from reach. The only sound that mattered was the faint hum in the room, the pulse of silence that seemed to vibrate from the frame itself. Her reflection was always waiting, sometimes smiling, sometimes solemn, sometimes pressing her palm against the glass as if urging Lydia to do the same. By the third night, without sleep, she broke. She rose from the couch, her body weak, and stepped toward the photograph. Her hand lifted on its own, trembling, until her fingertips brushed against the glossy surface. Cold. Her reflection's smile widened. The glass rippled faintly, just as it had that first time when she touched Mark's face. Only now, the ripple didn't fade. It spread outward, circling, pulling her hand deeper. Her skin sank an inch into the surface, as though into water. She gasped, trying to pull back, but the photograph clung to her, icy and unyielding. "Please," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "Don't." But the reflection leaned forward, mirroring her perfectly, and pressed its hand against hers from the other side. Their palms met, and Lydia felt herself slipping. The living room dimmed around her, colors draining, the air thickening until every breath was like swallowing ash. The world bent, tilting, spinning, and then she was falling forward, plunging through the glass. When she opened her eyes, she was seated in a chair. The studio. The pale backdrop stretched behind her, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. She turned her head and saw them. Her parents, frozen in their poses, stiff smiles plastered across their faces. Mark beside her, his eyes wide, his lips trembling as if caught between words he couldn't speak. Her heart pounded. She reached for him, but her arms wouldn't move. She was locked in place, her body stiff as a mannequin. A chill swept over the room. The man in the corner stepped forward. He was taller than she remembered, impossibly thin, his skin translucent, veins threading beneath the surface like cracks in porcelain. His eyes were pits of shadow, and his mouth curved into that same patient smile. "You've come home," he said softly, though his lips hardly moved. Her throat constricted. She tried to scream, but no sound left her. He circled behind the chairs, his long fingers trailing the air just above their heads. They never left. None of them ever do. They sit. They smile. They wait. Her father's eyes flickered toward her for the briefest moment, wide with something that looked like pleading. Then his face froze again, the smile locking into place. Her mother's hands clenched in her lap, white-knuckled, though her expression stayed serene. Mark's eyes brimmed with tears that never fell. Lydia's chest heaved, panic clawing inside her. "Why me?" she managed to rasp. "Why us?" The man tilted his head. "Because you looked. Because you remembered. Because you belong in the photograph." The room grew colder. The edges of her vision blurred. Her family sat frozen, captured in endless stillness, and she realized with a jolt that they weren't just posed. They were trapped. The man leaned closer, his breath like frost. "Now smile for me." The overhead light flared, blinding. The click of a camera echoed, and everything went black. When Lydia woke, she was standing in her living room again. For one fleeting moment, she thought it had been a nightmare. Her couch was there, her rug, the faint glow of morning through the curtains. But then her eyes lifted to the fireplace. The photograph hung there. Her parents sat in their chairs, smiling stiffly. Her brother beside them, tears glimmering in his wide eyes. And there she was, Lydia, seated in the front row, a ribbon in her hair, her expression frozen in terror behind the faint curve of a forced smile. Her real body trembled, hands clutching at her face. "No," she whispered, voice breaking. "No, that's not me. I'm here. I'm still here." But as she stared, the reflection in the glass blinked. Not in unison with her. Not a mirror at all. It blinked once, slowly, deliberately, eyes locking with hers. And then it smiled. Lydia stumbled backward, heart hammering. She ran to the kitchen, to the bathroom, searching for any mirror, any reflection to ground herself. But everywhere she looked, her face was wrong. Too stiff, too still. Her eyes lagged a fraction of a second behind her movements. She wasn't outside the photograph anymore. She was half inside, half out. The phone rang suddenly, shattering the silence. She grabbed it with trembling hands. Her mother's voice came through, frantic. "Lydia? Lydia, are you there? I had another dream. About the picture. About the man. He said you were next. Honey, please answer me." But Lydia couldn't speak. Her throat locked tight. She stared toward the living room, where the photograph waited. On the line, her mother's voice broke into sobs. "Lydia, please don't look at it anymore. Please." The call ended. Silence pressed heavy against her. The photograph loomed from the next room, its presence filling every corner of the house. She knew, with a sick certainty, that her mother was wrong. Not looking wouldn't save her. Nothing would. The smile on the glass widened, stretching beyond human. And Lydia understood. She was already part of it. The house grew colder. The walls seemed to lean inward. And in that suffocating stillness, She realized something that made her blood run cold. Someday soon, someone else would find this photograph. And when they looked closely enough, they would see her, waiting,